going to fiberglass the two halves of a nesting dinghy today. We're fiberglassing the outside of the hull. It's also the middle of the winter, so the shop's pretty cold. I can't really get it up to my, my 80 degrees where I like to work when I'm glassing. So we've got little plastic shrouds taped around the edges of the hull halves and radiant heaters inside to try to warm up the halves. We have to get the fill coat on today as well. We're using S-glass. We're using 4-ounce S-glass instead of using 6-ounce E-glass, which is what we normally use. We're trying to build a lighter boat here. There's quite a few details in this boat that are lighter than the stock PT11. The other thing we're doing a little bit differently is that these hull halves have been pre-coated with epoxy. The reason I pre-coated them is that often when you're laminating fiberglass over bare wood, you get little air bubbles coming out, especially if you have heaters inside the boat. And what I did was roll on a very, very thin coat of epoxy and then squeegee off all of the excess, basically forcing epoxy into all the little pinholes and fissures while the boat was cooling, actually, to try to basically seal the hull to eliminate little places where air will want to escape. And we'll probably still have some places where air wants to escape, just because we're trying to keep it really hot. The S-glass cloth comes in 27 inches wide and 30 inches wide. And we're going to have a patch in the middle where it doesn't quite meet. What we're trying to do is get it to have plenty of overlap at both ends, and we want it to fit into this corner of the gunnel and have the factory edge of the cloth come fairly close to the edge of the gunnel so that we get as much coverage up here as we can. You can push wrinkles out with your hands. Sometimes you need to pull on an edge. It has no bias resistance, so this cloth can move like that. So if you're trying to pull a wrinkle out, say there, you've got to pull on the edge or pull on this edge. You can never really pull on it on the diagonal and get the results that you're after. And it's good to get it really laying down flat before you start to glass, to get all the wrinkles out and get it really stuck down nicely. And if you catch your wrist brace Velcro on it, that's called a start. You can make a start in the cloth where you just bugger the fibers up. Even if you have rough spots on your hands, it can really distort the cloth. I've drawn a center line here. We're going to have an overlap. I like to keep my overlaps pretty narrow. So this overlap will be, I don't know, 3/4 of an inch wide. The other thing is that the edges of the cloth, of all cloth, the outer edges of the roll always have a fatter strand woven in. And that strand really needs to come out because here where we're going to have to put a patch over where the cloth isn't wide enough, if we tried to glass over that fat strand, it would bump the cloth up, it would make air voids underneath, and it would be detrimental. So we're always pulling that heavier strand out of the edges, and we'll have to do that where it will be overlapped. And it wants to stick, so you really have to hold the cloth down firmly while you're doing it, so you can feel the difference. That's a big bump. Right here, the strands that go this way being pulled out means that the cloth goes down to half thickness or less right there. So when we apply our patch over here, it'll ramp up over that in such a way that this piece of cloth still joins well to that piece of cloth, even if you block sand the bump off. See that wrinkle there? I can't pull it out by pulling like this. I've got to pull it out by pulling in line with the weave of the fibers, and then across ways in line with the weave of the fibers. So when we wet the cloth out, it will grow a little bit. It expands. So often if your cloth isn't quite covering an edge, it will cover once you've wet it out. Okay, now we'll trim the center line again. Sharp scissors are important for glassing. You've got to be able to cut cleanly. So normally I would be wearing a respirator, but today I have to talk while I'm working. Just so you know, good idea to wear your respirator. You know, mixing takes time, and because we want to go fast, we want to start with a big enough batch. And this epoxy is quite warm. Making it warm means that we get to mix it together more thoroughly and more quickly. So I buy these foam roller covers in 9-inch lengths, and I cut them on the bandsaw to whatever length seems appropriate. And we're starting out with a fairly wide roller here. We'll start in the middle and work both directions. Just setting this down and rolling a ways. So as you can see, we're not messing around with trying to make this perfect. We're trying to cover as much area as we can, as quickly as we can. And we'll come back later and even this out. But right now we're just trying to get it on there. Try to just wet the end of the roller for coming in here. Believe it or not, heavier cloth will wet out just about as fast if the boat's warm and the epoxy's warm. So this batch of epoxy is about over, so we'll go back to this side and even out the saturation. Okay, I'm going to make a wrinkle right here. You see that wrinkle? So if I roll straight ahead but with the roller angled, see how it just pulls the wrinkle out? So you can move the cloth from side to side just by, like I can stretch the cloth downward by angling the roller handle but rolling straight ahead. And you can see it up here, you can see it just stretching down tight. It's really hard to hold a roller pan in one hand. Okay, see that wrinkle I just pulled? I'm not going to want to roll over that. I'm going to want to pull the wrinkle out before I move on. Same thing up here. I've got little wrinkles developing. Yeah, holding a roller pan in one hand, you can often end up with epoxy running down your leg. So I like to have little platforms placed strategically around the shop for setting the roller pan on. For usually you would not try to wet through 2 layers at once. Like you would fold this back and wet this layer. But I'm not going to worry about that because we have light cloth and pretty warm temperatures, so we'll be able to just wet through both layers. See how I'm angling the roller to stretch the cloth that way as it's laying down. This is the little piece that fills in where the cloth wouldn't quite reach. And we'll try to kind of push this cloth toward the overlap. If we get wrinkles developing in this area, it's hard to force a wrinkle out of an overlap, from this side. So we'd have to pull the cloth that way to get rid of the wrinkle. But see how it just wets through both layers. And then this wrinkle here, we can pull out that way. These wrinkles, we might have to pull out downward. And I need to break and roll and mix some more. The boat's so warm that we want to make sure that everything's good before we move farther. Rolling across ways just makes sure that the glass is fully saturated at the chines. That's a little bit wetter than I usually would do. So we'll dry the roller out up here. And then we'll pick up some of those wet areas. So now we have both sides wet out up to the stem, and we're going to be overlapping up here. Let's fold 1/2 back. And because it's wet out, it'll kind of hang there and not fall onto the floor. And then we can finish wetting this side. Do a little bit of trimming first. So this is just going to wrap around. So now we're going to trim that a little bit tighter and hope we can get it to conform. Generally, the weave is at the bias right here, so we can make it compress as it lays down, in theory. We may have to cut a little dart into it, but it should just lay right down there. I'd say that worked. So one of the dangers of overlapping like this is if you were pulling on this cloth, you could force a wrinkle into this edge that you really can't get out. So it's good to be wet out right up to the edge of the wet part. Let's go ahead and fold this over. Then we're going to kind of tug on this and make sure there's no wrinkles in the layer of glass that's already folded. Got the roller just a little bit. The amazing thing about what we're doing here is that it's just liquid, you know, it's liquid plastic and fiberglass cloth. But when we finish this boat's going to be so much stronger than it was before. I mean, it's going to be like night and day different from a structural standpoint. See how there's all these wrinkles here? Those wrinkles are just going to compress. I'll trim the excess off. We want the glass to cover the stem right there. And then it does a little 90-degree turn right there. So that's why we need to snip up to those points. This isn't really a high wear area here because the bumper wraps over it, but just having that thickness there will make fairing things easier. And then the last thing is the edges of the gunnel. Again, we'll start in the middle and work both directions. It's amazing how much you can do with a roller, even a big wide roller like this. You can do pretty delicate things, and as long as it's a fairly tight inside radius, the roller just does the job, and it does it so much better than any other tool could. Even when we're painting, we use a roller just like this for the finished paint, just rolling right into the edge. It takes a bit of careful steering of the roller. So I've got some uneven saturation areas along the gunnel edge, and I don't want to hit it with a soaking wet roller. So I'm going to blot some of the epoxy off of this roller with a paper towel. And then I'm steering the roller carefully so that I don't hit the fiberglass gunnel edge. It's always good when you're done to have a really careful look at everything. Look for air coming out or any dry spots or overly wet spots. Takes getting your eye at multiple angles. That looks pretty good. On this end we have more surface area. So we're just going to go faster. We mix a bigger batch of epoxy. You really have to force yourself to not dab at it. You know, you're trying to think big picture and just get as far as you can, as fast as you can. It doesn't matter if it looks like that. You're getting it down. There's no big wrinkles. You're just getting the area covered as fast as you can. And part of why that's important is that you want to get your batch of epoxy out of the tray and onto the boat as quickly as possible because of exotherm. You know, if the epoxy's in a mass in your tray, it'll heat itself up and get thicker. The probably better in this case because my roller doesn't cover the whole thing to start at the bottom edge first. I'm trying to keep relearning that. Oops, got a big wrinkle there. Okay, this calls for drastic action. Let's see if we can move those up. Move that one over. That wrinkle right there can get pulled down. These wrinkles can get pulled down. Again, see how I'm angling the roller to stretch it tight that way. Okay. Now we'll do the transom edges. So I'm trimming those to that width because I want to be able to wrap the glass around onto the face of the transom, and that amount of cloth is about the bare minimum to have it actually stick and stay down there. The reason we're not fiberglassing the transom today is because I want to be able to basically block sand this whole buildup down flush with the transom. So this glass that's coming around the edge will be sanded off, leaving just the glass on the corner. And then when I glass the transom, the same thing will happen. Glass will wrap all the way over onto this surface and then be block sanded off flush with the hull. So there'd be no visual buildup there. And that's why I'm trimming it narrow. You know, it's a narrow overlap, so that I don't have to block sand off any more than I need to. Without block sanding it off flat, you'd be stuck filling this low spot with a wide putty knife and filler. Two kinds of bubbles when you're glassing. There's the good kind and the bad kind. This is the good kind, where it's actually blowing air out between the strands of fiberglass. And really all you have to do is go like that and the bubble goes away, but it'll come back. The bad kind of bubble is where the air actually pushes the fiberglass out away from the surface. And that can make a big hollow underneath the glass. So we only seem to have one bubble happening here, and it's up here in the stem, and it's got to be coming out of the wood grain. This is a 3/4 inch thick shaped plywood stem. But we're not worried about that bubble. Generally, when things are cooling, it's sucking epoxy into air voids. And when we do the fill coat later on today, we'll leave the heat on until we start applying the fill coat, and then we'll turn the heaters off. If there's air coming out anywhere, it should suck the epoxy into those voids.